Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. We're going to wrap up this week, as we usually do, with an album review, diving into an entire album, track by track, exploring what each song is doing in isolation and it's part of the larger whole. Today we're gonna look at an artist I have never heard of before, just simply titled Roar. We're going to be looking at the Diamond Destroyer of Death album, and I'm a big fan of alliteration, so I'm here for this. We have 10 tracks ahead of us, only 30 minutes all combined. Most of these tracks are, well, they average about 3 minutes a piece, which makes sense. I do have a little bit of context for this. The genre is psychedelic pop. It is kind of emo leaning, but I've been told not to let that get to me too much, even though that sounds like something I'd be really interested in. It says it does have repetitive motifs in each song, but that everything works well, and it's a bittersweet melodic type of album. So, some really good information to at least get my mind in the right place. Let's dive into this opening track, Copperfield, and see what Roar is bringing to the table today. Interesting shift. The compression keeps it heavy in weight like the old chord progression had, but particularly the guitars here are more uplifting. The vocals haven't changed though, and there's still a dreariness to the melody, which is clashing with everything else. Just descending pattern. It's interesting to listen to which notes clash and which do not. All right, calm down. I do like the coughing. Something that I brought up a long while ago was that a particular area of post-hardcore and screamo music, there's a lot of artists who end up putting coughs into the music, usually around some sort of really intense scream, usually after it. And it almost like I don't think that it always adds to the song, but it is this personality thing, and I don't really hear it in other genres. I find it interesting that this was described to me as pop music that leans a little emo, and I can absolutely hear that, particularly in the opening of this track. The vocal timbre, the vocal range, and the minimal guitar work here. Yeah, dude. Definitely feeling very emo. The rest of the song pushes more towards that psychedelic pop angle. But I do feel the emo undercurrent on this track, and to put the coughing in there, it's just like, what is it about this genre where the vocalists feel like they need to add coughs to the track? I don't know, dude. Like I said, I've never heard it in any other genre. And technically, I wouldn't expect to hear it here either. The emo is a subgenre. It is a spice more than the general flavor. But it's still related enough to emo and thus screamo that I can feel the pattern. It's really wild. I would love to do a week of songs where people cough in them. I don't know why. It's such a wild idea. It doesn't make any sense to me, but it happens way more often than I would expect. But here, like, it doesn't really match up. Like I said, most of the time it's after a big scream. Something that sounds like it should be destroying your throat, and hopefully it isn't, but then you get the cough at the end, and you're like, ah, dang, that must have been pretty rough. Like, it adds to the emotionality. It makes it feel more raw and sincere, less controlled. Here, though, the vocals are so light, so airy. They're all clean. There's nothing here that really should indicate that this person is scratching their throat or anything and causing the cough. It just happens to be here. I don't know, but it fits. And I think it's because of this pattern of screamo vocalists putting coughs into their music through the years. It's a weird pattern. The rest of the track, though, yeah, there's like 3 distinct sections in here. There's the opening, which is just the guitar and the vocals. There is the layered section that we get in the middle, which is an expansion of the intro. And then there's the descending riff that closes the track out. I think this is an interesting bit of movement, particularly if we look at it through an emotional lens. The track kicks off with something certainly dreary, at best, possibly melancholic. The guitar is just sort of there. It lingers. It doesn't play particularly fast, but it isn't particularly slow either. The note choices have darkness to them, and the vocals are, well, as I mentioned, just kind of light and airy, not a lot of energy put into them. They're doing the most they can just to be present. And you can't really expect them to be belted out, to have projection and power behind them. It's just not what is delivered here. And it does match the guitar, which is equally quiet. We start off the track, I think it was like 5-6 decibels below max. So they're definitely going for something a bit quieter here. And it contrasts well with the second section. But this entire opening just feels dreary, lethargic, low energy. The song itself feels defeated. Now, this does explode into the second section, though. We have the same guitar part over here, but there's some sort of synth or synthy violin thing in the back as well. There's new chords being played. I think the vocal line is the same. So the vocal and the guitar are doing the same thing, but these new instruments are not. I mean, they weren't present to do the same thing earlier, but they're kind of also doing their own thing here too. There's more optimism here. There's rising patterns as far as pitches go. And harmonically, there's a lot of positivity in here. But it clashes because the notes the guitar is choosing and the notes that the vocals are choosing are still carrying that dreariness, that heaviness, that darkness. It's a really interesting friction created from what we originally had and the layers that are presented on top. Is it dreary? Is it hopeful? Is it consonant? Is it dissonant? It's kind of all of that simultaneously. It feels like an internal struggle. And granted, the person who requested this said that it was an album of bittersweetness. And yeah, right off the bat, I can already feel that combination. I think if we separate the vocals and guitars from the rest of it and we focus on just the newly added layers, this is a beautiful moment. But it's still within the context of the intro, not just in sequential order, but simultaneous too. Those opening ideas are still present, not just lingering in our mind, but intentionally clashing with everything else happening here. This gives way to the outro, which retains some of that positivity in its chordal ideas, but the guitars shift to a descending pattern here, starting from a higher note, coming down 3 steps, rising up again, and then coming down 3 steps. It is generally always pointed down, but we do have a little bit of a reset in the middle of the riff itself. These notes are interestingly chosen. Some of them are very consonant with the more uplifting chords that are happening in the background, and other notes clash with it. I'm curious if maybe some of these notes are pulled from one key and the others are pulled from a difference. It's a clashing, put in the two sides of the emotional element of this track back to back. So it starts off as overly dreary to start with. I said to start twice. Ends up kind of being a mixed bag of emotions, and I'm not really sure where the album is heading because of this. They really could take it into a direction eventually of uplift, but it's still rather focused on the negativity. I also like how they're not afraid of using bits of dissonance here. I think that's a really powerful concept, especially with this idea of clash or friction emotionally, to inject that into the track as a key component, both in the second and third section, is really helping them to stand out in my mind. I think the last thing then I want to bring up is the vocals. I've already kind of touched on the lightness of them. But I do think that that's really important too, because in the first section, they're balanced well against the guitars, but in the second section, they get kind of drowned out. They're there for sure, but there's so many other layers going on. It's beautiful writing, and I love it from both the compositional standpoint, but also just a sonic one too. It's certainly a decision to stuff your vocals into the mix in something a bit more poppy. You don't see this kind of vocal production done too often in this type of sound sphere. And I think that sounds, it does a great job of telling the story of someone getting lost within something, which, I mean, what does that even mean within how I understand this track? I mean, having dreariness, getting lost in hope, having hope lost in dreariness. It's going to be interesting to see what the lyrics are on this one. But another production thing I want to bring up is this swirling sound that we really don't hear until the third section, but I think works really well with the descending guitar pattern. To me, it's I don't know what I would have landed on describing it if this hadn't been described as psychedelic pop, but it does have a little bit of a Beatles-esque sound to it. Some sort of sound effect they might have experimented. In fact, no. It's definitely something I could have seen them experiment around with, and maybe even something they did experiment with, but I'm just not well versed enough with their entire discography to have heard it. But it is a swirling. It doesn't really bounce back and forth between the two channels, but it feels like it does. I think this is really interesting. It might be a subtle shift, subtle panning between the two sides, but it does have this feeling of movement. And when you pair that with the descending guitar line, it feels like a spiral. It's actually really cool. And it is a bit of some sonic painting that I think does a great job in this track. And at least to me is incredibly easy to pick up and visceral. As soon as that section started, that was the first thing I noticed. I didn't quite know why I noticed it. I didn't know what it was yet. I was still interrogating what this section was doing, what all the instruments were, what roles they had, how they were participating in this overall sound. But it was the first thing I felt was, we're going down. And I think it was a combination of that sound, whatever was creating that atmospheric texture, and of course the descending line. Very neat start. Let me hit some lyrics on Copperfield, see what's going on there. Interestingly, not a lot of lyrics to this one. The first verse says, I can make the world disappear, turn it into silence. The second says, ashes that we leave behind here, turn them into diamonds. The chorus repeats the line, I can make the world disappear. The outro says, nothing is nothing too. We have an idea of escaping from something, making the world disappear, not necessarily making it invisible, but removing it. The noise and the chaos of the world turned into silence. We have transformation on verse 2 as well, something that is decayed and destroyed, ashes, leaving that behind and turning it into diamonds. So viewing a negative aspect and turning it positive. But I'm not sure about the outro, nothing is nothing too. And I'm not really sure how this lines up with the music. For something that's a type of bittersweet, a simultaneous positive and negative, I don't really see that here. The clash, the schism between the emotions felt in the music. The lyrics are rather straightforward, but they're also vague too. 3 whole sentences make up this entire song. A lot of repetition on the vocal side of things. So I think it's just kind of difficult to get a grasp on what's being said without having a little bit of extra context. This next track is called Paralyzed. I'm going to rewind it back that second. Let's dive in. Reminds me a little bit of Will Wood, actually. The mix of bounciness, joy, positivity with that turn of dissonance, of negativity at the ends. It's another section of a song that I can hear sort of Beatles inspired. Oh no. Ooh. The bells shift between all. Interesting. In the second section, the bells off to the side were bouncing between two notes for the first half, and then an arpeggiation of 3 notes, and then back down to the 2 notes for the third half, and the arpeggiation for the fourth half. Yes, I understand. You can't have 4 halves. But we're looking at 2 wholes here, so, you know, we can if we look at this improperly. Oh, that was kind of interesting. Like an expansion and retraction of this harmonic movement. The beginning feels like what I would expect. It's positive but dreary. We had that 4-chord progression with very bouncy, like bump, 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 very bouncy staccato notes on these. The chords moved from joy and positivity. Even, I mean, joy is a really good one, but it's also bouncy and fun. Very light on its feet, but the final chord twists that and brings in a bit of darkness to it. That's really the only indicator at the beginning that there's anything off here. The second section brings in phenomenal chords. I love the vocal harmonies here. There's some really cool movement underneath, but this is just a gorgeous section. There really isn't a lot of negativity in this one at all. It just feels incredibly hopeful. And that little bit of negativity that we heard at the first section isn't really present too much here, but it does eventually do. And the song feels like the media itself is decaying, or maybe the reader of the media is decaying. There's something that's breaking down here. And then we just have this detuned finale that's almost on the creepy side of things, but certainly melancholic. I think this is really interesting because it brings in a granular focus on harmony, on, well, I mean harmony, but also a pitch choice. What we do here is microtonality, but not in the usual sense of playing a note between notes, but playing notes that we expect, 12-tone intonation pitches, but then modulating them in post, using a pitch modifier to bring those pitches down. And it's a very smooth, granular movement of pitch. We get to hear all of the microtones between the key notes that we use in general Western 12-tone tuning. But I'm pretty sure that the final section is still fairly detuned. There's a lowness and a warpedness to the delivery of it. But I'm pretty sure that the notes, if I were to map them to a pitch, would not be what notes we would normally see in Western notation. I think we are working with microtonality there, but it's also through the lens of warped production, which kind of already makes it feel a bit odd or strange. And so I don't think the microtonality really registers as microtonal because everything else that we're hearing about it is also off or unusual. And I think that just works together to sell this idea of whatever's happening here is odd, strange, horrific even. It's a really interesting way to wrap up the track there. I also like how the song slows down. I guess a little bit of production knowledge here. Pitch modulation is actually two things because it's actually one thing that we do twice. Let me just explain this. Whenever we want to raise a pitch, we're actually going to speed up the recording. Whenever we want to lower a pitch, we're going to reduce the speed of the recording. This is actually what we hear in this place, and that's why it slows down alongside the pitch dropping. Whenever we think of auto-tune or any other type of pitch correction software, it's actually two parts. It's a reduction or an increase of pitch, which brings the temporal shift to, and then a readjustment of the time. If you slow it down to hit a specific pitch, you're also going to compress that snippet so that it takes up the same amount of time it used to, just with this new speed and pitch. And that's actually why auto-tune took off the way it did, because I believe it was the first, or maybe the first commercial software that combined both of these, the pitch changing and then the speed correction element. Here, though, we don't have the speed correction. It is just the pitch change. And I like how that's present here. We could have gone for a format shifting kind of idea that we see in a lot of pop music these days, where you just lower the pitch, but you don't actually address anything on the temporal side of things. And it's just rather consistent. But here we lower the pitch and allow it to slow down. And I think that's what gives it the degradation or the corruption, or as I was talking about, like the media itself falling apart. It feels destructive rather than artistic, rather than a production choice. Even though, of course, it probably was done in production. Though, you know, credit given to them too if they just did this organically. Just like had, you know, recorded this on tape or something and then just absolutely ruined the tape and recorded the destruction process. I doubt that's the way they went, but if they did, I mean, it sounds like it. So I guess either way, I give them props. It definitely sounds natural. And if it is, they went the extra mile to do this. That's about it, though. It's another track that's just hyper-focused, though. It's got its 3 sections. Each section is about growth away from the previous section, whether that means building off of it or building away from it as a way to oppose it in some way. But it's also short and linear. We get an idea, we see it through. We get an idea, we see it through. We get an idea, we wrap the song up. It's all very concise, and I really appreciate that. These 2 tracks so far haven't really tried to waste my time in any way, and while I do wish that there was some more cumulative writing so far, I would love to see things build into something. I think that's just my bias speaking, though. I think artistically speaking, I do enjoy what they're going for. I just don't know if I have enough time to connect with what it's doing. I don't think I'm spending enough time with these ideas to really enjoy them. And I think that's where I would like maybe some repetition, maybe variation on an idea. And we did get some of that. Track 1, part 1 and 2 were both very connected. It was layers on top of the old idea. But it was a combative movement too. So, I don't know. Like I said, I think it's just biases. I got to get on Roar's wavelength here. And if this is what they're doing, to kind of be on board with that. I see that they have a few tracks that are in this same 2.5 minute range. We have one track that's not even 2 minutes long. So I think these shorter ones, I just got to lock into this feeling of kind of fleeting art. By the time I've begun to dig into it, it's already over. And I've got to accept that that's what this album's going to be exploring. Let's hit some lyrics for Paralyzed. Another track sparse on lyrics. The first section says, use windows like mirrors. Soon a face will appear. You've made it a career. You're a prisoner here. I think it's interesting that the rhyme scheme is on the second, third, and fourth lines, but not the first. We have appear, career, here, but we kick it off with mirrors, which we kind of have that mirror, but there's the extension of it as well. So we have somebody who is stuck in a place, but it's somewhere that they've placed themselves. They are both the prisoner and the warden. They use windows like mirrors, trying to find themselves through what's around them, through what's outside of them as they look from the inside out. Oh no. The chorus says, lonely and paralyzed by fear, like every single time you hoped you would disappear. Disappearing is showing up twice now, so that's something to keep in mind. We have loneliness, which I think works well with disappearing. Paralyzed by fear, like every time you hope you would disappear. The outro says, I'm not going to help you, I'm not going to save you, but you won't let me be. Yeah, I don't know. It's all just a hair bit vague for me. It's, I don't want to say it's cryptic, but it certainly does feel like a puzzle. If there was just something more that I had to build off of context-wise, I might be able to come to a conclusion about it. Like, I can kind of see ideas and themes forming, but they're still hazy. I'm hoping that as we get through the album, I might be able to find some overarching theme. This disappearing thing is something I'm picking up on, and maybe apply that retroactively to some of these earlier sets of lyrics. But for now, we're going to dive into Demon Ghost Cave. So you have the very sharpness of the hits in the background, but then you also have the smoothness of the chords on top. Almost a dreamlike ethereality to that synth. The shimmering, though, is annoyed. Vocals lost in the mix again. Slight harmonic friction, occasional detuning, vocal distortion of all sorts. And back to this, almost as if to say, that never happened, ignore that. That guitar sounds slightly out of tune as well. Yeah, actually getting to hear that last note of the guitar, a really good showcase of the fluctuating pitch. I don't think it is always out of tune, but I think that it is quite variable. Almost as if the tuning knob is constantly in flux, or maybe the tension on the string is somehow always in flux. Maybe it's an old guitar and it just can't stay in tune very long. This lines up with a lot of the other tracks. There is a clash between hopeful, optimistic sections and downtrodden, dreary, and even melancholic sections. They sometimes exist as contrasts from one idea to the other, and occasionally other times exist simultaneously to create a harmonic clashing to add dissonance to the mix. Where this one deviates, though, is almost like putting two completely new sections, two completely new tracks into this song. The first time was sort of short-lived, and we flipped right back to the A section, and I had mentioned that it felt almost as if we were distracting away from that, almost as if we weren't supposed to hear that at all, and certainly just put your attention back over here, what we were doing in the first place, and forget you saw that at all. But the penultimate section also introduced some wildly different music. I suppose this could also be talked about on the other tracks, specifically track 1. I had mentioned how the second section built off of the first, adding layers to the guitar and vocals that we saw in the intro of track 1, but that the third section was sort of an all-new idea. Track 2 focuses to me more on all new ideas. There's less cohesion between sections, but this one I think really stands out in always coming back to this A idea. This is something we really haven't seen elsewhere, where I had talked about the tracks being more linear. This is channel surfing, where you have a home channel, your A section, and you get bored of it. What's on this channel? You don't want to lose it. I don't know how many of y'all remember the last channel feature on TVs back when we had cable boxes and we weren't all streaming our stuff. But you don't want to lose your last channel. Otherwise, you got to remember channel numbers. And if you really want to watch this last thing, you always got to make sure it's last. So you flip back to that, then you go find something else. And you flip back to it. And that way it's always on your last channel button. That's what this feels like to me. We're exploring different alternate ideas. It's almost like we have an A, B, A, C, A. I think that's how the song ended up being structurally. We just keep coming back to this core idea, but when we deviate from it, it's a pretty big deviation. We're changing atmosphere, we're changing intensity, we're changing instrumentation. I was talking about that shimmering sound on the first change, the B section, the second one of the track. And yeah, I mean, it's very psychedelic. The chords that were used, the instrumentation. I wasn't a big fan of the shimmery. I think mix-wise, maybe EQ-wise, it was just a little too sharp on the treble side of things. But still, it's totally different. And it feels so jarring to go from that back to the A unceremoniously, without any sort of indication to what we were doing. It's just, I don't even think we were finished with an idea. It felt like there was still room to evolve this B section, and then we just snapped back to A. That's what almost makes it feel like we weren't supposed to hear that at all, and the song was trying to get our attention back on something else. The idea itself hadn't been resolved, hadn't been finished yet. Now, I think the C section did a little bit better with resolution. It felt more natural moving from that and then bringing back the A section to wrap the song up, allowing it to bookend the track. But once again, it's a jarring soundscape difference, emotional atmosphere difference. It's an interesting third track here to kind of set up a precedence on track 1 and 2 and then subvert that. I was just talking about how I wanted sections to be observed more, to not be moving as quickly through a linear pace like we had been, and this track immediately fixes that in sort of a monkey paws fashion because it does allow me to spend more time with this A section, but all it does is make me wonder more about the other ones. Why don't we spend as much time with them? Why are they present on this track? What are they supposed to represent? It's a very interesting way to go about doing this. The other thing too is that the vocals, I could pick up words on the other tracks. Not so much here. This song, the vocals are buried heavily. I could barely pick up anything that was being said. If the other two tracks introduced the concept of the vocalist drowning within the music, this one showcases the vocalist submerged almost all the time. Maybe that makes sense for a Demon Ghost Cave song. The title right there is pretty antagonistic, it seems. A ghost cave is rarely good, but a demon ghost cave is probably not somewhere you want to be. There's a little bit of echo going on in, I think it was the B or the C section. Kind of gave it a cavey sound, but also distractingly. And I think that's a really good thing to describe this album so far too, is distracting. This isn't done from a production angle in a way that to me is palatable to the ears. It's certainly not unlistenable. This isn't lo-fi black metal, but it's not high fidelity pop music either. When I think of psychedelic pop and experimental, I'd say this album is being, I first think of Magdalena Bay, and they have phenomenal production values. This doesn't. And I don't think it is a skill element to it. I think that this is a core component to the album itself, is to create something that feels less musical and more artistic. That isn't to put down Magdalena Bay. They have some phenomenal work and they use the higher fidelity production certainly to their benefit. It's more of a difference in scope and intention. This is a bit grittier, it's a bit hazier, it feels dreamlike at times. It doesn't feel like music as much as it feels like sonic art. And I kind of hate saying that phrase. It's just that I lack the vocabulary to better enunciate my thoughts about this. Music is, by definition, art that is sonic. It is using sounds to create art. But I think there's a big difference between palatable art or palatable music and sonic art. And that doesn't mean that there isn't a gray area between them. Magdalena Bay absolutely makes sonic art, but it feels more palatable. There is an element of digestibility to their music that isn't quite here. This feels like the art is more important. Well, even that gets a bit, because again, it talks about intentions, and I don't know the intentions of the artists. I hope what I'm trying to say you understand in some way, even though I'm unable to convey it, to enunciate it properly. But I suppose what I'm trying to prove through this is that Roar isn't lacking skill to create something that is balanced and mainstream. That the ideas that are presented here and how they are presented from the production angle are intentional choices to create a specific sound sphere or experience with this album. And I do think that that experience is fairly consistent for me. None of this feels real. They feel like fever dreams, and I think a lot of that comes from the haziness of the production, how often the vocals get swept up into a swelling instrumentation, the lack of palatability. in here. Not to the point where no one could listen to it, but it definitely is not as pristine as mainstream pop tends to be. Lyrics. This one's interesting. The first verse says, "At the end of your life, you were worried about how I would live mine. Even when you're a light, you can choose not to shine in the darkest of times." Been trying to reconcile these. We have somebody who cares about someone else, but chooses not to be a light in the darkness, even for them. It's not that they didn't shine or couldn't shine. They chose not to. It's a very specific idea. Otherwise, I could interpret it as, running out of steam, wanting to do something but can't, pushing yourself too far and needing the rest, but the choice not to shine even if you're a light. That says something completely different. Verse 2 says, "I can love you today, but I can't guarantee that you'll be safe. Still, you can't be destroyed by anything else, not even yourself." Loving someone but not being able to guarantee their safety is normal. It's an interesting thing to say. I can't say I've heard that lyrical idea in poetry or music before. Once again, kind of a very unique idea to present. But I love the next line, that you can't be destroyed by anyone or anything, not even yourself. The concept of you will last forever because of who you've impacted. You will be remembered. Your existence is not forgotten. That cannot be destroyed. The first bridge says it's okay to want to die, but you can't hide from every subsequent new life. That I don't get. I don't understand what the subsequent new life is. Why they wouldn't be able to hide from it. But to say it's okay to want to die after, technically this comes before the second verse, which says that you can't destroy yourself. And the first verse that says, at the end of your life, you chose not to shine in the darkness. So we have a song about suicide. The penultimate section is a repetition of "though you really tried to do all that you could." And I'm curious how to interpret this. We have talked about this person in both a positive light, a light in the darkness for other people, but also from a negative fashion, someone who's tried to take their life, someone who stopped being that light for others. When it says you tried to do it all, what angle are we talking about there? Maybe both simultaneously, talking about all the ways they've tried to be destructive in their life, but all of the ways they were also constructive, that they helped others. To literally do it all, not just in one aspect, but in all of them, positive and negative. The outro then, much like all the other outros, pushes in a totally different direction and says, "In my dream, my shadow came to me wearing the skin of my enemy." Something I thought was mine is not, and is an adversary. My shadow, which I thought was tied to me, ended up presenting itself as a foe. Which I suppose within the context of suicide, someone wanting to destroy themselves, I suppose we could see this. particularly if we went in maybe the Jungian perspective of the shadow. We might be able to see some element here where we can tie these two together, the destruction of the self, this damage or destruction coming from within, something connected to the self. But it's also, I assume with all the second person yous in this track, that it's talking about someone other than the narrator. But the outro is first person. So I don't know how to reconcile that. The next track is called I'm Not Going to Help You, which, coming off of this track lyrically, is an interesting title to move into. Let's see where this album goes. There's almost a calm to this, maybe a type of serenity. I like the bass tone on this song. Yeah. With the lack of resolution on the da 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 da, that final note there, it's just not really strongly resolved. It's not super tense, but it's not a good solid resolution either. And when I saw there's 4 seconds left, I was like, there's just no way to resolve this. You can't have this end nicely. And I really thought they were just going to leave it on that semi-resolved final note, but then they just have a burn at the end of the track. And you know what? I'll take it. It's unorthodox, but I'm sure it has a reason. This song, this one's straightforward. Probably because of the short runtime. Probably because the extended chorus that we have in here, the spaces between our B sections are incredibly short. And so a lot of the time ends up going to the chorus itself, which has that Beatles-esque pop rock sound to it that's pretty consistent on this album. It is accompanied with dreary chord progression, kind of bittersweet feeling there, as there is a bouncy positivity that is accompanied with negativity. It feels like a broken record at this point. I did notice the bass on this one though. I really like the roundness of the tone. Bump, 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 boom, boom. I just wish it had done something different. It did have a cool slide that was present in that final section of the track. I think we moved between 3 notes. We'd kind of like play 2 notes, drop down, or like slide down, then bounce back up and play a couple. Like, it was a neat little idea, better than the pedal tone stuff we heard in the rest of the track. But it doesn't grab me. I want more out of it. And I guess this kind of goes for all of it. I want more out of it. I'm beginning to find that I think this album is more of an atmosphere album than anything else, which is great. I listen to a lot of atmospheric music. I don't know what to add to it analytically. Especially with this, I mean, all 4 of these tracks have been diverse enough, but they're all cut from the same cloth, obviously. And I fear I'm running out of things to bring up between them. So let's hit some lyrics. I'm starting to see some very interesting connections here. So I'm reading through the lyrics. Verse 1 actually has a pretty cool thematic idea going on. It says blowing kisses into the abyss, and it's someone else's problem now. And then phone it in to feign lip servicing. So lip service is to say something even if you don't necessarily mean it. Phone it in means to just get it done, do the bare minimum to get the task finished. But phoning also has talking, which is mouth-based. Lip service is mouth-based. Blowing kisses into the abyss. We're looking at lips again. This is very interesting. But it talks about being distanced from something. Blowing kisses into the abyss could be sending love somewhere and then not caring about who the recipient is or if it even reaches the recipient. It is performative, as the lip service and phoning it in showcase. This is performative love. And I think that's where the chorus kind of sits. It says, I'm not going to help you. I'm not going to save you, but you won't let me be. You're on your own here, but you won't leave me alone. These lyrics, though, have me thinking. These seem awfully familiar. So I went back and I was looking at some other tracks. And wouldn't you know it, track 2, Paralyzed, the outro is the exact same lyrics. Now, I'll be honest, it doesn't make any more sense if I view track 2 through the lens of track 4's themes, which I know we haven't touched on, but we'll get to in a second. But as I'm reading track 2's lyrics, the chorus says, lonely and paralyzed by fear, like every single time you hoped you'd disappear. And for some reason, I vaguely remember thinking that this was first person, not second. I don't know why. Maybe that wasn't how it was and I'm misremembering things, but I was very surprised to read every single time you hoped you'd disappear. Or maybe I was reading that from a internal to external kind of idea, from yourself to yourself. Either way, I read it in a different light this time around because we just got done with a set of lyrics about someone wanting to commit suicide. The bridge to Demon Ghost Cave says it's okay to want to die, but you can't hide from every subsequent new life. The idea of hiding is very analogous to hoping you could disappear. But also disappear could be analogous to death as well, suicide. A more literal, figurative type of disappearing there. And I'm starting to wonder if each of these tracks is kind of narrow in its idea. Some of them have a few more lines, but there's plenty of tracks we've listened to so far with, 5 lines total in them. Lots of lyrical repetition is present on this album, but what if I have to understand the album as a whole? I don't know. We're only 4 tracks in. There is a lot of lyrics left ahead of us, but this is going to be something that I'm going to be keeping in mind because I'm beginning to see where maybe the tracks themselves are not giving enough information. As I had mentioned earlier, I wish I had more context to some of these vague lyrics. And I think the context is the other tracks, or in this case, maybe the other lyrics. Regardless, going back to I'm not going to help you, the second verse says, now you couldn't give it away or pay someone else to take it. Beautiful, useless, and full of excuses. So there's something that the other person in this story wants to get rid of but can't. Can't get rid of it. No one wants to take it. Can't even give it away for free. It is beautiful, but it is useless. And given that this is throughout this album talking about love for another. If we go back to Demon Ghost Cave, I can love you today, but I can't guarantee you'll be safe. We look at the opening verse of this track right here. It says blowing kisses into the abyss. It is performative, sure, but it is still love. I wonder if here in the second verse, the other person is trying to give their love away and can't. They still pester our narrator, though. And I think that's an interesting word because assuming all of this is connected, which I have nothing to justify that assumption, but it's what I'm working off of right now. We're looking at somebody who has suicidal tendencies, maybe even based off of track 3, went through with a suicide attempt. Right here is in a place where they could use someone else's help, and our narrator is choosing not to. Despite that, they keep talking to them. They keep wanting to be around them. It says, you won't let me be. You won't let me be alone. Ooh, actually, alone's good too. The opening track was about wanting to be alone, making the world disappear and turning it into silence. You know, even on the topic of suicide, that would work as well. From the perspective of the one who dies, the world does disappear. A return to non-existence fits that really well, shifting things into silence. I don't think it works so well from the idea of turning ashes to diamond. Still not sure what's going on here, but I have found more puzzle pieces. Come to find out, I left some in the box and I'm pouring them out and things are starting to come into focus. I don't know if that metaphor worked. The next one we have is called The Opposite of Flowers, which seems to work really well with this concept of performative love and trying to get someone who is pestering you to stop. Let's dive in. It's very fun. That double hit on the snare. This whole song feels very pre-2000s, 60s, 70s, maybe even a little before, maybe 50s drum work. This is a drastic change, just organ and vocals. Beautiful guitar move. Oh, gotta bring in the dissonance though. beautiful finger-picked guitar playing, but this doesn't fit anything. It's also, I think, our first 3-pulse in this entire album. Okay, slightly indulgent there. And I did see that the audio was still playing. I wonder if that's going to sort of naturally fade into the next track. There's only less than a second left on this track, and the volume was still kind of up there. But it was fading out, at least to my ears. Very interesting song here. We start off with a bit of a look back musically, very bright and bouncy and poppy. We have this classic snare accent of a double hit on 2 and a single hit on 4. So you have the ta 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 ta. It's just very dancey. It does remind, I think it's the 50s. I think that's where that drum pattern was really popular. You kind of mix that with some of the more optimistic and cheerful vocal melodies in here, and the ways that they swell up and come down. Very large, I guess not super large, but compared to modern music, which is like have a home note and kind of bounce slightly around it, it's kind of like focus on one tone. You know, this has range to it. It has movement. It's definitely an older melodic style as far as popular music goes. It's just a very bright, cheerful, optimistic sound that occasionally throws in dissonance, heaviness, weight, and dreariness. You know, the MO of this album so far. I do think that this general sound, though, is quite interesting, despite it definitely being pop music and fitting in with modern pop sensibilities, particularly from a kind of production standpoint. Again, it's a little hazier than most pop would have. The vocals are stuffed into the mix a little more, but I don't think I would confuse this for older music. It definitely feels modern. But compositionally, it does like to look back to the past. And I wonder if that sort of nostalgic lens from a compositional standpoint is supposed to be understood in the music as well. This is just a hunch because I can't point to any specific line in the lyrics that allude to this, but there is a feeling that I get on this album of kind of wishing things had gone a different way. Not necessarily that the story is told in real time, but that these are all vignettes of someone in the future of where these events happened, looking back on them. I think that's why I understand it to be so abrupt, kind of channel surfery at times. This track just completely veering off into a wild direction at the end of it. But I think it was Demon Ghost Cave. Was that the one that was bouncing back and forth between some really interesting and jarring transitions? It also introduces the hazy element to all of it. And, I've talked about it just kind of being dreamlike often, but, Memories is a really great way to kind of sum up the feel of this album too. And being that we are halfway through, I feel a little stronger in resolve to describe the experience of the album this way. We still have half an album to go. Things can change, but here at the halfway point, it is a pattern that I'm seeing, that I feel a lot of this has the haze of memory, and memory typically comes through with bittersweetness too. It is both the feelings of the moment and the feelings of how we relate to that moment now, after the passage of time. Sometimes that's bittersweet. Sometimes it's another different mix of emotions. Sometimes the bitterness is the moment itself and the sweetness is recalling it. Don't know how that would normally work, but the inverse is true as well. Thinking of a really joyful moment and knowing what happened after that, or wishing you could go back to days like those, bringing a bitterness to it from the perspective of time. And I wonder if the music isn't supposed to push towards that. Now, this could just be Rohr's style. Maybe everything that they create has this sort of older look to it, a very 1950s, 1960s vague homogeny of popular sounds all kind of smashed together into, again, a lot of this is very hopeful. That is a strong description of 1950s music in general. But it does have a lot of hopefulness to it. And my best read of this is that that always comes from the melodies. That the negativity, the weight, the dreariness, the melancholy comes from the clashing sounds, the things that smash up against that classic sound. And again, a lot of this is coming from a modern perspective too. If we go back to track 1, all the tracks kind of have a generally emo sound to them, but I think track 1, the opening of the album, the opening minute or so, is just a really clear-cut showcasing of just the guitar, the acoustic guitar and the vocals. And it's just clearly modern emo right there. Post-2000s emo sound. And for a modern sound to clash with an older sound is just like a person in the present day thinking about their past, their history, and their emotions now clashing with their emotions of the moment. Smash all that together into a whirlwind of hazy production and tucked in vocals and general melancholy laced with optimism and joy. And yeah, memories just feel right. So then, what about the outro of this track? The rest of this track is kind of in line with that whole hypothesis there, but we just have this extended guitar section. Beautifully finger-picked. Absolutely love that, but it doesn't really fit with anything else. Honestly, I don't have a read on this, but we saw this same sort of juxtaposed writing in Demon Ghost Cave as well, and maybe it's just the mind wandering. Maybe it's the free form flow of emotions. I should have said feelings. I should have had the F thing continuing. My brain was just a hair too late on that. That would have been good. But yeah, maybe it's just stream of consciousness. Maybe it does have something to fit in there in pertaining to something else on the album. I don't know. I haven't heard too many musical motifs so far. But having track 4 call back to track 2 lyrically already has me wondering if there aren't going to be musical callbacks on this album too. And maybe we just haven't reached this one yet. Maybe this finger-picked guitar part comes back in the future. And I'll tell you, as far as memorable writing so far, this is probably the most memorable, the one that sticks out to me as a unique idea. I don't think anything else really does that, and I think primarily it's because a lot of the instrumentation is similar from track to track, and there's just a lot of chordal information, whether it is straight chords, pedal tones, or arpeggiation, any type of chord shaping. There's just not a lot of melodic writing for me to latch onto, and while, to be fair, the finger-picked guitar part there at the end of this track is mostly chordal based, it is something we haven't really heard before. It's really fast. It's not the whole thing strummed out, but it's not a slow bum, 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 a slow arpeggiating idea either. It is sonically fresh to me in a way that not many other ideas have been. We did have the bells that I thought was kind of interesting from a timbre perspective, but they were just bouncing between 2 notes and eventually 3 notes. Once again, just basic arpeggiation and chord shaping. We have an organ in places, but just playing chords. So it's possible that these are playing specific ideas we heard earlier, or maybe we'll hear them later, but there's just not enough memorability to the specific ideas to make them stand out in a way that I'm going to be able to pick up on it on a first time listen. But we'll see how that goes. Like I said, though, this finger-picked guitar part stands out to me, and if we hear anything like it again, I'm going to think, oh yeah, the opposite of flower is the end of it. That's exactly what it's going to remind me of. So we'll see if that happens. Yeah, let's hit some lyrics. All right, being that this is the halfway point of the album, I decided to look up just a little bit of background information and didn't really find much pertaining to this album specifically, though I did find out that this project, Roar, is just one person. It's a solo project of musician Owen Evans, who was part of Asleep in the Sea, a band that I've never heard of. And eventually went on to drum for the folk punk band AJJ, which I believe I have heard of. That name sounds familiar to me at the very least. So this is all a solo project here. And that's about all the information I have to go on about this album in particular, other than the single concept that the album is about isolation, which I think is interesting. I haven't quite worked that into my understanding of all this yet, because there seems to be a lot of second person speech in here, but even with the track I'm Not Going to Help You, it was about someone that wanted our narrator around, and our narrator didn't want to be that person. Now, as for the lyrics, this is one of the shorter tracks. It says, "Is there something wrong with me if I hate to see you happy and everything feels empty? Is there something wrong with me when you tell me that it's nothing, but I cannot let that dog sleep?" So there's another person, and they're close enough to converse. This isn't just a random stranger. And our narrator is not happy when they're happy. The phrase that "I cannot let that dog sleep" just means that they can't push this aside. They can't forget about it. It's something that keeps them up at night. They feel like there should be more in life, and there isn't. They feel empty. The bridge to this track says, "No one thinks about you even half as much as you think that they do." And that is, to me at least, a really important line. I used to have crippling anxiety about pretty much anything public facing, just constantly worrying that people notice the smallest things that I do, mistakes or imperfections or blemishes or whatever. And something along the lines of this line was always really reassuring to me, and helps me a lot even to this day, as being someone who gets in front of a camera and records his thoughts with my face and body exposed to the world. It's not like I'm hiding behind a VTuber or putting up, images instead of showing my face or whatever. The idea that most people don't care about you, don't recognize you, don't see you in quite the capacity you see yourself. This also really helps in the world of live music, as all the little mistakes you play, you just got to learn that most people aren't picking up on that. Most people in the audience are just not paying that much attention. And while it sounds negative, no one thinks about you even half as much as you think they do. Well, some people might wish that people thought about them. But for me, it's always been a bit on the reassuring side. And I think this is, is the glass half full or half empty kind of thing, where it's really about perspective. How do you want to perceive this line? For this track, we have somebody who is talking about not being happy in life. You would think that this would be a negative element. The final chorus, though, says, find a way to love when you feel lonely. Find a way to love when you feel nothing. Find a way to love in spite of everything. That negativity is not worth anything. It drags you down. It drags down those around you. If you want to rise out of things, if you want to be better tomorrow than you were today, if you don't want to feel the way you do today, tomorrow, start with love. Start with love even when it doesn't feel like you can. Start with yourself. Granted, the lines themselves just say find a way to love, but the way that I understand this is find a way to love yourself when you feel lonely, when you feel nothing in spite of everything going on. Find a way to love yourself. But this idea of loving another is also fairly present in this track as well. While the loving yourself might help with some of the suicidal themes on here, there's also the performative love to another that we saw in tracks like I'm Not Going to Help You. And even, I think it was Demon Ghost Cave. Yeah, Demon Ghost Cave. Even when you were a light, you can choose not to shine in the darkest of times. I love how new lyrics make me reinterpret old ones. It doesn't say that you chose not to shine. It says you can choose not to shine, which presents an option. It doesn't say that the other person doesn't want to shine. Maybe they still are, despite having the choice not to. Interesting. But yes, loving others is a part of this as well. And as we saw in I'm Not Going to Help You, performative love, maybe the person just wasn't happy themselves and wanted to see the other person brought down a peg, as mentioned at the beginning of Opposite of Flowers. I'm not happy when you are. Maybe this is recognizing that that's a problem, and instead of going with the flow like we did on track 4, here we're taking steps to improve that, to find a way to love others when our body, when our mind incorrectly tells us we shouldn't. And so maybe the beautiful finger-picked guitar part at the end of this track is about finding love. It doesn't really groove with the rest of the track. It kind of comes out of nowhere, but that's the point. If at your lowest, when you're feeling the least in love with life, force it. Force the love. Fake it until you make it. The beauty at the end of this track, devoid of any of the melancholy or dissonant elements that we have heard throughout this entire album that clashes with the positivity, That's gone. This is just the positive. Is it forced? Is it out of place? Yes, but that's exactly what the lyrics are saying. Make that your reality. Your reality will then bend to that. And so the song ends with this beautiful line. Right after saying, find a way to make love happen. Beautiful. I hope we stick with this trend, though the next track is called The Vulture and the Void, so that doesn't sound too positive. It's also the longest track on the album at 4.5, so let's kick it. I kind of figured. I had mentioned at the end of the last track, didn't sound like it was done. But it was also just a long suspended tone too. So we had the guitar and then the drone and then back to the guitar right at the midpoint, a moment of inflection. I like that bass line. Okay. What is that texture on the outside? It's like a drone of ooze, of Oz. That's big. That's really big. That's the descending line from the opening track. All right. So the end of the last track was the finger-picked guitar, followed by like a minute of drone. And I think this is the only time so far, even including the end of track 6, that we've transitioned from one track into another. And it just happens to be right at the midpoint of the album. Track 5 to 6 on a 10-track album. But after we get through this drone, we wind up where we were. We bring that finger-picked guitar back, and it's still gorgeous. It's still a beautiful idea. Well executed. But what does this mean? I had mentioned a point of inflection, and I kind of thought that that might be where we're going. If you cut the album in half, that they would be reflections of each other. That might still be accurate, but this track is not very much like track 5 at all. In fact, it's almost like a reset. This track parallels track 1 really well. We start off with a set of ideas, we then build from there, and we transition into a third brand new section that features a descending pattern. Now, the first two sections that build on each other are distinct. I don't think we've heard anything like that so far, and rhythmically it makes heavy use of space in a way we haven't really seen too much of on this album. In fact, there's a very jarring full bar silence almost before we move from the first vocal section, I'm going to call it verse, into a chorus. It is quite distinct and, like I said, very easily not like anything else, but the general vibes and layers on this section are present within the chorus too, but we expand the instrumentation on it. Very interesting to see these parallels. Also really interesting to hear that descending melody come back. But as much as I thought that maybe this was an emotional point of reflection, we're kind of going back to the same stuff. I was hoping that with the line about learning to love even when you don't, and then bringing in this beautiful isolated guitar section, and then returning back to it, that maybe we would continue to push in this direction, but the verse and the chorus and the finale of this track are more of what I would expect from the album. A bittersweet mix. Something that feels dreamlike and hazy, joyful and melancholic simultaneously. And if the beginning of the album was a clearly coded descent, this is just a slide downward. It's missing that back and forth that I kind of had. I don't even remember what instrument gave me that feeling there, but this is just the piano descending in an incredibly gazy, hazy vibe. It's just really big. And this came off of the chorus, which is just, that chorus is huge. It is overwhelming. There's so much distortion and fuzz and size to these instruments. There's clipping even. You can hear little static artifacting happening during that section. It is the sounds pushing against and trying to crack the sound sphere itself to take up more space than it is allowed. And instead of cracking and breaking, it retains its size, and then we start, well, like I said, sliding downward, falling, descending, with this heavy haze surrounding us. Very much like this album, but not. Very much another side of the coin to track 1, but certainly not track 1 part 2. It is both in conversation with everything that's happened prior to it, while still being distinct. There is no other song on this track like this, and yet every song is similar to this, and there's even direct callbacks. The Vulture and the Void. Let's find out what this is about. All right, so lyrically, we have the exact same outro as Copperfield. That matches the musical motif too. The lyrics there, of course, are just nothing is nothing too, which we saw at the beginning of Copperfield, or the end of Copperfield, and it didn't really make much sense there. I'm curious if all of this is supposed to be read together though. This track is about wanting to feel nothing at all. The chorus says, I don't want to feel anything at all if I don't have to, because feeling can be cruel. This does kind of line up with some of the ideas I had about what Copperfield meant, despite its rather vague and limited poetic exploration. It did talk about wanting to turn the world into nothing, to make it disappear and replace it with silence, to not feel anything. There's certainly threads being tied between these two tracks here. The rest of this track, the verses are about, not enjoying what you're feeling, which leads to the chorus's wish for numbness. The first verse says, I feel betrayed by my own insides. It does say that I felt shame when I prayed that you would die, which I'm kind of curious where the larger story is here. There's certainly a continued pattern of wanting to be separate from everything. Once again, this isolationistic viewpoint of stuff. Even this one right here, don't want to feel anything at all. It's just distance yourself from everything, but also to push your emotions away, to exist alone, devoid of everything. But there's also this larger story of the narrator and this other. And we're getting snapshots of this. Nothing's really coming into clarity for me, but you can tell that they were close at one point and that they're sad that they passed away, but that their relationship was complicated. There is a really nice wordplay in here. At the end of verse 2, it says, Carrion, my wayward son, describing a vulture here, while being a play on words of carry on, my wayward son. That's it's pretty fun. Yeah, though, the further we get into this, the more everything starts to make sense, and the more ties I can see between all the ideas, both musical and lyrical, on this album. The next one is called Reaction Video Dream, which is pretty funny that it's appearing in a reaction video. Let's see what's going on here. That's the same chord progression as Paralyzed, Demon Ghost Cave, one of them. It's warbly, but a very cool moment. the shifts change, the pitch change that we saw on Demon Ghost Cave, I think. Back to a 3 that we haven't had too often on the album. Yeah, this is so scattered. Kind of twinkly. It's tough to understand this one because it feels more scattered than the others. It definitely reminds me of Demon Ghost Cave with the more rapid changes between ideas and the starker contrast as we transition between wildly different concepts. But also there's so many familiar parts in here too. The opening chord progression reminds me of Paralyzed or Demon Ghost Cave, one of the first few tracks. It was the one that I brought up, feeling very Beatles-esque and optimistic through a majority of it, but then finally landing on quite a bit of tension and darkness on that final chord. But then we also hit the 3/4 section, which, I mean, I don't know exactly if this is identical to the last time we were in a 3/4 section, but something about it felt familiar at the very least. I believe this track had the most amount of musical callbacks, though this may be simply because we are getting further into the album here. And so if we're going to start calling things back, now's the time to do it. It's tough to do a callback on track 1, 2, or 3 because we're just starting. We're setting down the foundation for things to be called back to later. And here we are, track 7. We're definitely in the back half of the album. For a project that is going to be self-referential, as often as it is both lyrically and musically, now's the place where all the pieces need to come together. You've set all the breadcrumbs, now you need to... that metaphor fell apart. All the work got put into it, though. You need to, you got to do the execution now. You've actually got to make this plan come to fruition. And maybe that's what's going on here, but it's also the first one that specifically brings up the theming of dreams. It does feel dreamlike, the way that it shifts and molds between musical concepts and the way that dream logic just doesn't make sense, but you roll with it anyways. It is funny though, a reaction video dream. I'm curious what the lyrics might bring up, because musically, I mean, this is more of the same. Granted, it's a lot of different the sames, but it is dreary, melancholy, yet upbeat. It has a nice psychedelic, hazy, dreamlike element to it. The vocals are dreary and it's kind of lots of softness to the movement, legato style. But that's just the first part. We also have other styles in here where we bring the energy down, where we bring the energy up. but they all feel tied to or referencing something else in the track. Again, it's a lot of the same, but all different. This track as a whole does not work for me, but I think it does lay down the vibes that they've been going for this whole time. And I think that this is the most dreamlike track while still capturing a lot of these same emotions. I feel like I'm talking in circles here. I don't have much else to add to this other than it's being the most eclectic track on the album. Oh, we did have the formant shifting, or the pitch dropping that we saw on one of the earlier tracks too. So that was another callback to an earlier idea. It really feels like a medley of things that we've experienced prior, and I can't really see it as anything other than that, because it doesn't, as far as my experience with it, bring much new to the table. But it does fit within the album rather well. It's, it's the atmosphere we expect from the album. Diamond Destroyer of Death, which is, so what does that mean? Let's hit some lyrics on this one. In this one, we see a callback to Demon Ghost Cave, though I don't necessarily, maybe that was where we heard the triplet. The chorus to this track says, "In a dream, my shadow came to me wearing the skin of my enemy," which I thought was pretty interesting of a line in that track, but once again, it really stands out in this track. It feels like it fits better. This song is about feeling separate from yourself. Verse 2 says, "I saw myself inside of my own life." To be an observer rather than a participant in your own existence. The idea of having a part of you feel opposed to you works really well with this. And verse 1 adds to it. It says, "I hear a broken mind when I lay my head on the pillow." Yeah, okay. So I can relate to this track. To feel like you're not in control of your life, your body, your actions, and when you lie down at night to go to sleep, a mind so active and full of so many thoughts that are not always positive. To hear a broken mind when you're trying to shut down and get rest. Yeah. Now, I couldn't quite make sense of the final line of verse 2. It says, "My liquid crystal light had frozen me for a time." The idea of being frozen, of being paralyzed, being stuck, that's pretty consistent throughout this. Also, being frozen in a crystal would probably be pretty isolating. Probably no one else frozen in there with you. So I saw some thematic similarity here, but I didn't quite get it. And as usual, shout out to the people at genius.com who post their observations and perspectives on things. Liquid crystal is it screens, liquid crystal displays, LCD, to be frozen for a time, not an extended period, but for a moment, to be frozen, particularly, as we've already talked about, when laying the head down on the pillow. The common idea of a millennial going to bed after a long day and turning out the light and 2 seconds later grabbing a phone and doom scrolling until they pass out. Yeah. I think that this person's right. I wish Genius would put contributor names somewhere. I feel bad just repeating stuff without giving credit, but it doesn't say who posts this. But anyways, if this was you, thanks so much. I really appreciate this perspective because it lines up so well with everything in this track. And I do think that that's what's going on here. Someone to deafen or maybe shut out the broken mind while they're laying on their pillow, turning to a screen in order to kill some time or to freeze them until they can pass out. And while they think of this, they perceive it as a shadow, a part of themselves wearing the skin of my enemy, seeming like an adversary. But the seeming is really important there. I didn't catch up on this, or I didn't catch this the first time we saw this line. But it isn't that it is an enemy. It wears the skin of the enemy. It appears to be an adversary. But what I like here is we have an expansion on this. Instead of repeating that line again, it says, telling me sometimes things can seem like an eternity. There's calming words here. It may seem like a long time, but that's it. It's just appearances. This too will pass. The shadow seems like an enemy, but isn't. Because at the end of the day, it's the self. This is a song about trying to get away from the self because there's a disconnect somewhere. You don't feel like an active participant in your life. You just need to realize that there is no adversarial part of you. It's all you. Very interesting track here. And I love how it recontextualizes that line about the shadow. It doesn't, like we have seen in other tracks, recontextualize it for the first time that it came about, though. I don't think that that line's inclusion in Demon Ghost Cave means anything different to me now that I have this context here. But the fact that that's happened on 2 tracks already is already, I'm already kind of sold on this from that alone. I wouldn't consider this a dropped ball as much as just not sitting up to the same standard as the other cases. They just set a really high bar. Next up we have Take Me, shortest track on the album. Really big wall of sound again. Not a lot to add to this one, but I do want to point something out. This is becoming a recurring theme, that the endings of tracks just aren't strong endings. And I'm starting to figure out why. There's no variation on the chord progression to create strong resolution, and the progressions themselves don't introduce lots of resolution. They are designed to be repeatable. There is a general feeling of a home sound and then moving into something tenser or darker and then coming back to something, but quite frequently, like we saw on this track and what we saw on track 6 and 1, is that the final chord is tense. It's actually a subversion rather than a return to form. And so for tracks like this to wrap up neatly, to have a sense of resolution at the end, they're going to need to change the chord progression. We're going to need to alter it to have that full resolution at the end. And they're just not interested in that at all. And we are finding that many of these tracks are ending on chord progressions based around subversion rather than reaffirming, returning back to rest. And instead of making alterations to it, they just run it out. We got our 4 chords, song's over. And that's what happens here. That's why these songs kind of lack a strong feeling of finality. Objectively, not great writing. And subjectively, I'm going to say it's not really my cup of tea either. If you've seen me talk about music at all in the past 5-6 years, yeah, strong resolutions, good endings, finales. I'm a big fan of all of these. I like to hear how something gets wrapped up, and this album doesn't. But I do think that thematically it works well from an artistic point of view. If this is a bunch of vignettes of memories, there's no storytelling to memories. They just happen. It is a part of your life. No beginning or end, just happens to be this hour from May 17th, from 6 years ago. Why you remember that moment? Don't know. Maybe it is super important. Maybe that's why you remember it. Maybe it's not. Maybe you have no idea why you remember that one moment from your childhood. It's such a weird detail to remember, but you'll never forget it. And it's clear as day. But is there a beginning to it? Is there an end to that memory? No. It sort of just is. It is that moment. There's no clean 3-act structure to it. That's what these songs feel like. I think track 5 is obviously the big change from that, as we have some drone that just moves into the next track fluidly. But almost every other track just kind of stops being at a certain time. And this one, I think, carries on that, and it just reinforces my idea that we are looking at memories, little vignettes, stories, or I guess in most cases, feelings from a specific time in life. Other than that, a majority of this track is what I expect from this dude, but I really like the size on this. It reminds me of the Vulture and the Void, which just had this huge wall of sound in it. Just sounds massive. I think this is the same exact guitar tone from that track. But what I really like is that riff. We kind of cut out, do we cut it out from the center and put the guitars on the side, or cut out the sides? Anyways, there's some emptiness in here, and it allows this guitar riff, descending guitar riff, to really have focus, and it's these big, gritty, chunky guitar tones. And it just sounds cool, especially pocketed in the middle of these two just massive atmospheres, these walls of sound surrounding it. I always felt like the song, I don't know, was missing something. after these and we return to something a bit lower energy, you can just tell it feels empty now. Let's hit some lyrics. I think this song is a cry for help. A feeling overwhelmed, looking on past experiences and decisions, and just coming to the conclusion that you don't have this. Give me some direction. Give me some help. Both of the verses have this idea of just take everything and tell me what to do. The first one says, take the dirt I'm standing on, take the virgin snow and show me where to go. The second one says, take my blood and my lungs and my guts, take this flood of empty thoughts and tell me what to do. The chorus, I think, is where we start to see. It says, I laid waste. At a breakneck pace, I was waging a war. I will grind myself like a corpse. When I have been given free rein to do what I want, it's always destructive. I'm reckless. I wear myself down. I don't know how to be, but I don't think it's could someone show me. I think maybe eventually this song might lead to a mindset of learning, but it's another destructive message right here, how I read it anyways. Show me where to go, tell me what to do. They just want to turn their brain off. They want to be on autopilot. It's too much. Someone else just lived my life for me. That's what I get out of it. And I think that's really interesting because it's like right on the cusp of wanting to be better, of reaching out for help in a situation where they feel like they're drowning. But it comes up right to that frictional point of having to put in work. And it says, I don't want to do that though. Can someone just do everything for me? Tell me what to do. I'll follow your instructions to the T. I don't want to think. And I get it. I really do. But I do hope that if this track indicates anything, it's that growth is around the corner, more so than this just being another destructive step in this person's life. And I think that's where the big guitar comes in. Just this overwhelming sound that they just want to silence. Someone tell me what to do because this is my life right now and I want peace. So much of this album has been focused on, when it brings up sound at all, is to get away from the noise, to find silence. And so when the chorus is saying, you know, my life is just wild. This is the music that's playing. This is the chaos they're trying to escape from. All right. 2 tracks left. No One Thinks About You. This is probably a callback to the track that says no one thinks about you as much as you think they do, or something like that. So let's see if lyrically they explore that idea. Very new sounds. Kind of a 90s pop thing, but like a U2 thing going on with the reverb and clean guitar. Yep, there it is. That's the same chorus as the last track. That's a really quick turnaround. All the instruments are just like on one note, but the bass has some cool moving ideas here. Very uplifting on the outsides though. Yeah, easily the most uplifting track on the album so far. There was some tension with the vocals. It's interesting too because I've never really thought about the vocal intonation too much on this album. It's been a bit on the raw side where there's less production and less pitch correction on it than, say, a traditional pop track. But it hasn't really been distracting in any way. It's been a very natural type of no voice is perfect kind of thing going on. But here I feel like there's a really interesting clashing with the vocals and the notes. And I think some of it might be harmonic, but I also think some of these notes are incredibly flat. It has to be intentional because the vocalist has been in tune enough this album, again, that it hasn't been distracting, but here it is very clear to me. It's something that stands out so much is how the vocals are clashing with their atmosphere. And, you know, for an album where the lyrics have consistently been dreary and heavy, assuming that the lyrics are the same, here it makes sense that they would clash with this overly joyous atmosphere. There really isn't any darkness to this track at all. It's just generally upbeat. And I think a lot of this also stems from the fact that musically, I think the inspiration is a bit newer. While the end of the track, once we bring in the tambourine, definitely harkens back to an older decade, the beginning of this track felt very 90s pop rock, something akin to a U2. It is a stark change, something that I think still generally fits as an optimistic poppy rock sound is fairly consistent across this track. And we have danced across a couple of different decades. But, you know, we haven't had anything this modern aside from the general post-2000s emo style vocals and chordal work that we've kind of had smashed against these older pop ideas. So I think that's really interesting that we kind of have this whole genre shift there. But by the end of the track, again, we've kind of looked a bit further into the past. The tambourine, the focus on heavy quarter notes, the wide, lush production, all of this really begins to harken back again to a more Beatles-esque sound. But as far as dark chords that subverts more optimistic progressions, they're not really here. As far as something like track 1, where we had the darker guitar work and brighter band work smashing together and creating friction, we don't have that here either. This is generally optimistic through and through. And I think that's a really interesting change in the penultimate track. With only 3 minutes left in the album, we have found some peace of sorts. I want to hit the lyrics right now. I don't think I have much else to add to this, but I do want to say that what I picked up in the lyrics so far is all callback. No one thinks about you half as much as you think they do, or something along those lines. And then the breakneck pace, grinding into a corpse or whatever from the last track. I don't remember any of the other lyrics on this one, but those two were very common and repeated often. It's interesting to hear a track that has so much of its lyrics tied to the past. Oh, snap. Lyrics constantly referencing the past. If this is an album about reminiscing on the past, vignettes of memories, the fact that the lyrics continue to call back just lines up with that. Referencing something in the past, remembering something in the past is what a memory is, and this album does it constantly. Let's hit some lyrics on this one. Context is important, and it's interesting how context can change interpretation. Originally, I had understood the "no one thinks about you half as much as you think they do" line in a positive term. And I thought that the lyrics of whatever track that was supported that. But here, not so much. Especially when you pair it against the chorus from Take Me. I laid waste at a breakneck pace. I was waging war. I will grind myself like a corpse. Something I didn't pick up last time was the change in time. I laid waste. I was waging, past tense. I will grind myself like a corpse, future tense. All of these are very similar. It's self-destruction. But two recognize something that happened in the past, a pattern of past actions. One is a recognition that those patterns will influence the future. But when you look at those within the context that no one thinks about you half as much as you think they do, it makes it easier to view that in a negative fashion, that we have somebody who is lonely. They want affection. They want people to notice them. They want human connection. And they tell themselves that no one thinks about them. Even as much as I think people might think about me, it's only half of that. And so they turn to self-destruction. They live a reckless life. Verse 1 says, does it get lonely spending all of your time in the future? Where the present isn't great, and you envision a day where all your problems will be non-existent. The problems you have will be gone eventually. At some point in your life, you must have taken care of them. It'll be nice when you don't have to worry about this stuff. It can become paralyzing when every day for weeks, months, years are about fantasizing about a future that hasn't come yet. This feeling of being lonely only exacerbates the reading that the chorus is to be understood from a negative perspective. Verse 2 says, tighten your grip and it will break you apart like a cancer, and you have been tricked into believing it gets you an answer. This is a bit more cryptic for me, but I think the idea of trying to control everything and believing that to be how you achieve everything in life is only making things worse. That you need to let go of some stuff. You need to prioritize what in your life is worth hanging on to. Because otherwise, you're just going to get stressed out, run down, you'll grind yourself. And it's just going to completely destroy you. I also think it's interesting that for a few tracks now, we haven't talked about this other person. I'm curious what, I think you may remember halfway into this album, I had mentioned wanting more backstory on it. That it works enough to drive the narrative, but that I am kind of intrigued about their relationship, something that seemed adversarial at times, but close enough to be friends. They talked to each other. I still am curious about that, but with one track left, I don't think we're going to explore it too deeply. But we've kind of left it on the back burner to focus on the narrator here. I do find it interesting, though, that as straightforward and negative as this track is lyrically, it is the most straightforwardly positive musically. We have an interesting schism there. Now this next track is called It's Fine Every Time. And there was a track that had this in it. Oh, no, it wasn't. I got it confused on the opposite of Flowers. Verse 2 says, is there something wrong with me when you tell me that it's nothing? And I misremembered that as you telling me it's fine. The idea of nothing does pop up a lot of this album, though, both the idea of nothing and nothingness, but also emptiness. Just a general void of something, no thing, to be a bit more literal about it. All right, let's see how they wrap this album up. Not not positive, but calming. That not so much. But the other half of this. I don't know if it's acceptance, but balance, maybe. I like that synth in the background. It gets me every time. I like the synth in the background of the acoustic guitar part, though. There's some screeching over there. Something organ-like. That line's from one of them. Oh, I bet it's from Paralyzed. I think the last time we heard this lyrical section was also with a generally calming or reassuring musical side too. And it was also harmonized. Vocally harmonized, I mean. It just ends. I will say that's one of the stronger endings on the album, but it's still not particularly great. It's just not a cliffhanger like we've heard in some places. Yeah, this one also feels like a bit of a mishmash. We have a reprise of a couple of different ideas. We have, I think, a brand new opening, though. It's kind of like a medley of sorts, and it makes it tough to talk about this album as a whole because I think at the end of the day, the entire thing ends up being very fragmented. Story-wise, we kind of get different pieces of the story in a non-linear fashion, but even musically, with so much of this being callback, especially on the back half here, it ends up just... Here's something interesting. I don't know how I was going to finish that, but how do you understand something that is self-referential to the point that you need to understand it to understand it? Like, none of these songs really work too well on their own. Even with a track like Copperfield, which is the first thing you hear, some of the musical motifs and definitely some of the lyrical motifs only shine once you understand their context later in the album. But you have to understand what they mean later in the album to understand how they mean at the beginning of the album. Everything in this is in conversation with itself elsewhere, which is also how memories work, how we work. We are a product of our actions. Who we are today is because of what we've done yesterday. And a lot of this album feels like that. In a lot of ways, it almost becomes a living work of art. I'm glad I listened to it this way as a full album. While there are a couple of tracks in here that I think would have worked well for a single analysis, a single reaction video, none of it is really understandable on a first time through in isolation. As well as the songs might work by themselves, you can't understand any of it by itself. It's like picking out a random memory and trying to figure out why it's significant when you don't understand the rest of someone's life. From that angle, I find this to be incredible. There aren't too many works that I've described as living art, and that's because it's kind of a tough thing to create something locked in time to be described as living. But for so much of this to require more of it to understand, I find that really interesting. And beyond that, quite incredible. I don't think it is musically strong all of the time, but I think as far as having a vision and executing I hate to use this word, the gimmick of the album, being that so much of it is in conversation with itself, that execution is phenomenal. I mean, there really is not a single track on here that I would say this one's fine to listen to in isolation. None of them, lyrically, musically, motifs, thematically, artistically. It's just on no level do I think any of these work on their own. You can certainly entice somebody, hey, do you like this atmosphere? Do you like this sound? But you can't understand any of this by themselves. And even right here, I think I have such a flawed understanding of the first half, maybe even 2/3 of this album, because I was missing the rest of it while listening to it. And even though I had the opportunity to go back and at least compare lyrics from older tracks and newer tracks that shared stanzas, there were a couple of times I picked up on musical motifs that were repeated, but I'm sure there's a lot in here that I missed the musical context. Because, as we're at 2.5 hours into this video, I listened to Copperfield 2 hours ago. Actually, a little bit over that because, I pause for lyrics and have to read and digest and understand. So, probably closer to 3 hours now since I listened to Copperfield. I can't remember the music from that far back. General ideas, sure, but exact motifs and how they might be misrepresented or how the representation changed or meaning changed based on the lyrics that were sung at the time against the lyrics that are sung against that same melody in a new section of the album. Like, no, it's so deeply intertwined. And I find that to be exceptionally phenomenal. This track in isolation, though, like, it is just it's fragmented. It's so many different things that I don't think I can really add much to it. It is a product of its past. Doesn't really make much sense on its own. And I wager this is probably true for a lot of songs on this album. I have made some sense of them, but kind of walked away from many of them saying either one of two things. This fits in with the general dreary but bouncy sound that they go for, or they're doing a bunch of disparate things and it's tough to read it as a whole. I still have lots of questions about the lyrical narrative, the musical narrative. I still have no idea about the inflection point and the middle of the track. What is that about? Again, I really thought we were going to do an inversion kind of thing. Finger-picked guitar, drone, finger-picked guitar. We have now reversed. We've done the opposite. We're going into the mirror. Actually, the mirror was presented on track 1 or something, so the idea of reflection was already kind of ingrained from the start. And I don't think they did that. We did have a lot of callbacks in the back half to the first half musically, but definitely not in inversion of things. So I'm curious what that means and why it's present there, and how Opposite of Flowers and Vulture in the Void might be sibling songs of some sort. They're the only ones that are connected. I don't know. I hope that I have given you all something to chew on, to think about, to mull over with this album, especially if you're a longtime fan of it. Maybe I said some stuff today that you had never considered or hadn't had the perspective to see. But by no means would I say this is exhaustive. In fact, I feel like I've barely scraped the surface and have certainly more questions now than I did even at the halfway point. There's so much to this album that I don't get yet, and it feels like it's so full of secrets, and that is incredibly enticing. Let me hit some lyrics on this last one, and then we're going to wrap this one up. This song is about a constant spiral, which I think is interesting. That was introduced at the beginning of the album, but I think something really stood out to me. This is a lot of callback, by the way. We have the section from Take Me where he says it's a habit, just being dramatic, no reason to panic. We have Lonely and Paralyzed by Fear, like every single time you hope you disappear, from Paralyzed. And then we have I Don't Need Anyone, I Don't Need Anything, I'll Be Fine on My Own, which came from something. Thought it came from something, actually. Oh, it has the same cadence to the chorus of I'm Not Going to Help You. Anyways, the end says, I don't need anyone, I don't need anything, I'll be fine on my own, at least I'd like to think so. So we are rapidly pulling from other tracks to show this degradation. Now the opening verse says, I don't blame you. There's nothing to do. I can't even cry when I need to. So we have someone who is completely emotionally numb, completely drained, pushing all their emotions away. There's just nothing left. They're in this shell. Now, this was something we explored earlier, and I wish I could remember what track this was, talking about wanting to be distanced, not just from everyone, but from everything, emotions too. And here at this place, we have finally pushed those away. It says, every time I think I found it, I'm wrong. Always thinks that they have found a solution to this emotional situation they're in. I mean, this album is about isolation, but I think more than anything, it's about mental health. It's about someone who needs help and never gets it, ends up being self-destructive, but also pushing away everyone around them. And I had mentioned that the other person in this story hasn't shown up in a while, and I think that's why they've pushed him away. Or maybe they've died. That's possible too. But they're just not here anymore. they seem to be some sort of anchor for our narrator, sometimes against our narrator's will, but they were human connection, and our narrator doesn't have that anymore. Now they just hope that they can disappear, or at least make the world disappear. Everything else they've tried doesn't work, so here they are. At the very end, I don't need anyone, I don't need anything, I'll be fine on my own. Though there is some hesitancy to this. It says, at least I'd like to think so. And I really like that because it presents this idea of stubborn isolation as the answer, but already the cracks in that are starting to form. They're not as confident in that as the answer, but it's the only thing they have now. Much like everything else, this is what they're trying now. And they think they have found it. Maybe. Unfortunately, from experience, it's never the answer, and that just makes the end of this album rather tragic. These are my thoughts, anyways, on Roar's Diamond Destroyer of Death. Still don't know what that means. Let me know what you thought of this album. If there's anything that stood out to you, anything that you would like to add on to what I said or correct me on, do you have your own take, perspective, or opinion on this? Let me know. Put all that and anything else you'd like to add into the comment section below. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree. Nope, I don't know why I did that. It's always over this shoulder. That link to Linktree will take you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. I'll be back tomorrow, 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 3 p.m. UTC as usual, for Sundays at least. We're going to check out a bunch of music on a live stream over at twitch.tv/criticalcomposer. We just listen to music, we chat, sometimes we talk about the music, sometimes we talk about other stuff. It's just really laid back, usually just a fun, solid 2.5 hours. If you can make it, I highly suggest it. Otherwise, I'll be back Monday at the usual time, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, for the more traditional reactions. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.